Content warning. This story contains details of residential schools and the abuses that took place there. This story may be triggering for some viewers, so please be advised. Another shocking discovery is reopening old wounds for Canada's Indigenous people and Canadians. On Thursday, Cowessess First Nation's chief announced the discovery of 751 unmarked graves at the site of Marieval Indian Residential School. It's not yet clear if all of the unmarked graves are related to the residential school or if they belong to children. But according to their oral tradition, the Cowessess have long known that their ancestors are buried there, and now they have proof. Marieval Indian Residential School was operated by the Roman Catholic Church from 1899 to 1996 in an area where the Cowessess First Nations is now located in southeastern Saskatchewan in central Canada. It was one of more than 130 compulsory boarding schools funded by the Canadian government during the 19th and 20th centuries, with the goal of assimilating Indigenous youth. It's estimated that over 6,000 children died while attending these schools, in large part due to terrible living conditions. Last month, the Cowessess began to use ground-penetrating radar to locate unmarked graves at the cemetery at Marieval Indian Residential School. And Thursday's announcement marked the first phase of their search efforts. Cadmus Delorme, chief of the Cowessess First Nations, told the press that this is a wake-up call for everyone.
All we ask of all of you listening is that you stand by us as we heal and we get stronger, and that we all must put down our ignorance and accidental racism of not addressing the truth that this country has with Indigenous people. We are not asking for pity, but we are asking for understanding.
This find was the second and largest discovery of this kind in less than a month. Over 200 unmarked children's graves were found at Kamloops Residential School in British Columbia, and we covered that story in a previous video linked below. Experts predict that more discoveries like this will be found as provincial governments are giving Indigenous communities funding to conduct their own searches. In a statement, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that he's terribly saddened by the discovery in Saskatchewan, and he says, quote, "The hurt and the trauma that you feel is Canada's responsibility to bear, and the government will continue to provide Indigenous communities across the country with the funding and resources they need to bring these terrible wrongs to light." In 2008, the Canadian government formally apologized for residential schools and admitted that sexual and physical abuse was rampant. But the Roman Catholic Church, who was responsible for up to 70% of these residential schools, has not issued a formal apology. Indigenous leaders have long argued that the legacy of abuse and intergenerational trauma is the reason for the epidemic of alcoholism and drug addiction on reservations. In light of this recent news of 751 unmarked graves, there are renewed calls to cancel Canada Day on July 1st. The hashtag Cancel Canada Day has been trending on Twitter in recent weeks. Those in favor of canceling Canada Day, which usually includes celebration, festivities, food, and concerts, argue that the day should be spent in reflection on the injustices inflicted on Indigenous people. The Indigenous rights group Idle No More is planning protests in Vancouver and Ontario on July 1st. A message on the organization's website reads, "We will not celebrate stolen Indigenous land and stolen Indigenous lives." It adds, "Instead, we will gather to honor all of the lives lost to the Canadian state. Indigenous lives, Black lives, migrant lives, women and trans and Two-Spirit lives, all of the relatives that we have lost." Cities in the provinces of British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick have already cancelled their Canada Day celebrations. And statues of figures who were involved with residential schools in Canada's history have been vandalized and removed throughout the country. As news of these unmarked graves spreads around the world, it's triggering conversations about how Indigenous peoples are treated worldwide. As fellow human beings, and especially as Christians, we have a responsibility to make sure that things like this don't happen again. So now we want to hear from you. What do you think it would look like for Canada to have true reconciliation with its Indigenous peoples? And what can you do to learn more about and support the Indigenous people in your community? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear. And for more news, stories, and culture, stay tuned to Faith Strong Today.